Hello everyone, today we'll be talking about a sustainability plan for Tübingen, navigating the sustainable future for the university city of Tübingen in Germany. Today's presentation will include an introduction and overview of Tübingen, a discussion of the key sustainability issues for the city, the sustainability vision, policy response to sustainability issues, a brief discussion over governance objectives, and then a summary and close. Tübingen is a small city located in the southwest of Germany. You can see on Google Earth images that Tübingen is located in the state of Baden-Württemberg, just south of Stuttgart. If we zoom in a little bit further, we can see that Tübingen is located in a valley. This is the Neckar Valley, which eventually runs through Stuttgart and down into the Rhine. The old city dates back to the 14th century and earlier, and this university is scattered across the old city and just to the north of the town. There's a large hospital located up on the hill. The north side of town is quite hilly and the south side is more flat by comparison, and the woodlands you can see on the images is generally located on the tops of the hills, whereas the agricultural areas are located in the valleys. The population of the town is about 85,000, which does depend on where the semester's in session. So let's look at some of the demographics. Germany has an aging population. In Baden-Württemberg, the percentage of people over 65 has doubled since the 1970s. But in Tübingen, it is generally younger because of the university. 12% of the population in Baden-Württemberg are non-German citizens, which is the highest percentage across all of the German states. This is generally concentrated in the bigger cities, but it is increasing in regional areas like Tübingen due to the refugee intake. The unemployment rate for Baden-Württemberg is 4.6% and for Tübingen is 4.3%. As a university city, Tübingen was largely spared during the war, which means it has kept a lot of its original heritage. This picture you can see here is one of the hero shots from Tübingen, and most of these buildings date to the 14th century. Many of the old heritage buildings around town still stand, and some have been converted into more modern housing. Tübingen is already quite sustainable, with a very progressive mayor, Boris Palmer. Cycling is the main form of transport, but car sharing and public transport is also popular. There is a big focus on resource efficiency, and I've brought along one of the pamphlets that we receive in terms of the city energy consumption. In my home alone, we have 6 types of recycling options, but there are areas that need work. Tübingen is well connected to nature. It's representative of the Middle Europe climate and has easy access to woodlands with many walking trails frequently used by residents. There's also a number of allotment gardens which are particular to this area of Germany, where families can grow fruit and vegetables outside of their small apartment. This is a picture of the Neckar Island located in the middle of the Neckar in downtown Tübingen, and it's great to go for a walk, particularly in summer. The sense of community spirit in Tübingen is generally pretty good, with a lot of cultural hubs around town that provide a community space for people. Over the past year, there's been more of a concern over the integration of the new refugee community, which is a problem across the whole of Germany. It is a little bit better in Tübingen as a university city, but still the problem exists. I've identified 5 key sustainability issues for Tübingen, based on an assessment of local newspapers and anecdotal evidence from the community. The first sustainability issue identified is the availability of affordable and diverse housing. There's a housing shortage, rents are high, some dwellings are unoccupied but suitable for housing, the refugee housing is disconnected, and land availability is low. The second issue is the recognition and retention of heritage buildings. The old city was actually put forward to be considered for UNESCO status, but was unsuccessful, although the application process did uncover some useful information. Some of the heritage buildings outside of the old city have been demolished. It's expensive to maintain, poor thermal efficiency, and there's difficult regulations. The next issue is the support and integration for the growing refugee community. Housing for refugees is disconnected from the rest of the community. The refugees have limited German language ability, limited access to education and employment, and the non-refugee community is struggling to accept the new refugee population, a problem across the whole of Germany. The recycling system in Tübingen is actually pretty good, but there are some shortfalls. More than 50% of plastic recycling is collected, that is collected is not actually recycled. It's incinerated to produce energy because of the high cost of recycling. And the recycling success is let down by the separation of waste by individuals, as well as the ability of the technology to separate the waste effectively. The last issue is climate resilience within the community, business and schools. There's a lot of focus in Tübingen given to emissions reduction, but very little focus on climate resilience. Some areas of Tübingen don't have very good access to public transport, especially in the industrial areas, and there's growing issues around the impacts of climate change, so really hot summers, hay fever in the spring, and more severe thunderstorms. So the following section will present a vision for Tübingen in response to these sustainability issues. So my vision for the sustainability of Tübingen in the future is that Tübingen will be an environmentally minded, economically resilient, culturally diverse and inclusive community. It will ensure that all its residents, businesses and visitors have affordable accommodation, can appreciate the history and heritage of the city, feel part of the community, have sustainable waste management and are resilient to the impacts of climate change. The purpose of the Tübingen sustainability policy is to guide Tübingen over the next 15 years to ensure that the city is environmentally minded, economically resilient, culturally diverse and inclusive. It is prepared for the Tübingen local government, but relevant to utilities, state government, transport departments, local community groups, sporting groups, universities and schools. The 5 key policy objectives for the city will be availability of diverse and affordable housing, recognition and retention of heritage buildings, support and integration for the growing refugee community, maximising the effectiveness of the recycling system, and then climate resilience within the community, businesses and schools. For the purposes of this presentation, I'll provide an overview of the first 4 policy areas and then drill down a little bit more into the detail for the final climate resilience policy area. For each policy, we have a list of actions and the action objective, the lead responsibility and then support responsibilities, a 2030 target, and then a list of the related policies. For the first one, the availability of affordable and diverse housing, the actions focus on making sure that housing is available and affordable for the whole community in the future and alleviating the housing shortage. So the actions focus on urban renewal projects around key transit and employment nodes, ensuring that there's a diversity of housing options from single bedroom right up to a full house, that new developments, retrofit developments have access for all abilities, that the availability of land is monitored, unoccupied dwellings are available for housing, and also that new developments provide affordable options for lower socioeconomic groups. The lead would be the local council, and it would receive support from developers, land and homeowners, affordable housing not-for-profits. And the related policies are Policy 2 and Policy 3. The second policy is in regards to the recognition and retention of heritage buildings. The 2030 target is to ensure all significant heritage buildings are retained and restored by utilising the UNESCO study to identify key priorities for the retention and restoration of heritage buildings and sites. Again, to support home and landowners in the restoration of heritage buildings, identify options to retrofit large heritage buildings, and promote and celebrate Tübingen's diverse heritage and history through tourism. The lead is again the local council with support from developers and land and homeowners, and it links back to Policy 1 which we just mentioned before. The next policy area is in regard to the support and integration for the growing refugee community. The 2030 target is that refugees and new migrants are and continue to be fully integrated into society and have equal access to education, employment and social networks. The actions focus on providing accommodation, education, employment opportunities, and equal opportunities to refugees, but also in providing education to non-refugee residents on their new community members. So ensuring that both Germans and refugees understand the culture, language, customs and laws of each other. The lead is both a state and local government, with support from the refugee community, schools and universities and other tertiary education providers, community groups and sporting groups. And the related policy is affordable and diverse housing, just to ensure that the refugees have suitable accommodation. The fourth policy area is around the recycling system. The action is that all recycling waste collected from homes and business is recycled and reused where possible. So identifying where the ineffective recycling processes exist, particularly in regards to plastic. Increase the recycling of plastic waste through improvement of separation technology and investment. Education around residents and businesses on consumption and waste separation, and education within schools. The lead responsibility is the Waste and Recycling Department, with support from environmental groups, the state and local government, schools and universities, and it links into climate resilience policy, which we'll discuss next. The final policy area is around climate resilience within the community, businesses and schools. The 2030 target is for all homes, businesses and schools to be resilient to the impacts of climate change. And the actions are around identifying the risks of climate change and responding accordingly. We'll be focusing on action 5.1 and 5.2. The first is to identify the risks of climate change to the community, businesses and schools, especially regarding those anecdotal risks identified on warming summers, storm activity and hay fever. And the second is to ensure that homes and businesses have the resources to adapt to these risks, particularly in regard to sustainable cooling options. The lead for this policy is again the local government, with support from businesses and school environmental groups, the state government and universities, and it links back to the previous policy around the recycling system. If we drill down more into the detail for this policy, we need to understand what's behind the actions. So for action 1, what are the climate change impacts? What is the likelihood of each impact? And who's the most vulnerable to the impacts? From there we can picture the key output of this action being a climate impact assessment that is undertaken by the end of 2017. The key indicator for this action, linking back to the goal, would be that the local government, community, businesses and schools are aware of the impacts and risks of climate change. For the second action, we need to understand how homes, businesses and schools can respond. Who should take the lead for each sub-action there? Is funding required? What's the time frame and how can it be measured? The key output for this would be a climate resilience plan that is prepared by the end of 2018, informed by the climate impact assessment and implemented by 2030. The key indicator would be the community, businesses and schools utilising the information and resources to ensure that their homes, office, school, buildings, transport and business strategy are resilient to the impacts of climate change. For each policy and action prepared in this presentation, the next step is to write key indicators that ensure that the policies are implementable. From a government's point of view, engagement with the community is a necessary step in building and finalising this sustainability strategy. The strategy needs to link in with all government departments and the state government and understand how there are linkages across policies and actions. It's also recognised that data capture of the process is an important component of the strategy. In summary, Tübingen is an old city, but with modern problems such as housing shortage, climate resilience and social cohesion. This sustainability strategy has identified 5 areas of critical importance: housing shortage and affordability, heritage retention, integration of the refugee community, recycling effectiveness, and climate resilience. These policies will provide a framework for Tübingen to move forward towards a more sustainable future. Thank you.